The weakest species. The galaxy was full of powerful races. Some were born with bodies strong like iron, some with minds sharp as machines, and others with weapons that could destroy whole planets. But among them lived a race that everyone called the weakest. They were called the Zerath. The Zerath were small, thin, and fragile. Their bones were light, their skin was soft, and even their voices sounded weak compared to others. They had no great armies, no powerful weapons, and no terrifying warriors. For centuries, they had survived only because stronger empires allowed them to live. They were farmers, workers, and traders, but never fighters. In every corner of the galaxy, the same words were whispered. The Zerath are the weakest species in the stars. The Zerath hated this truth, but they could not deny it. They had tried to fight wars in the past, but their armies were destroyed in days. They had tried to build fleets, but pirates burned their ships and laughed as they ran away. Over time, the Zerath stopped resisting. They accepted their role as the galaxy's weakest people. But deep inside, not all had given up. Some of them dreamed of a day when their race could stand tall, when they would no longer be the galaxy's prey, but its equals. Still, dreams were not enough to change reality. One night, in the Grand Council of the Galaxy, the Zerath sent a request for help. Their leaders stood before the representatives of powerful races, their hands shaking as they spoke. "We beg for protection," said Elder Vera, her voice trembling. "Our colonies are raided. Our children are taken as slaves. Our people are dying. Please, give us allies, give us strength. We will serve you if you protect us." The chamber filled with silence. Then came the laughter, deep, mocking laughter from dozens of alien leaders. One of them, a scaled warlord from the Dravak Empire, slammed his clawed hand on the table and sneered. "The Zerath? Protection? What good is it to protect insects? You are too weak to be saved," another delegate added with a cold smile. "Even if we gave you ships and soldiers, you would only break them. The Zerath cannot be warriors. You are destined to bow forever." The laughter grew louder. The Zerath leaders lowered their heads in shame. Every word was a dagger, but none of them could argue. It was true, they were weak. Just when the mockery reached its loudest point, the council doors opened. Heavy footsteps echoed across the chamber, and in walked a group of tall figures, their eyes sharp, their steps steady, their presence heavy like a storm. The other aliens fell silent at once, for these were humans. Humans were a young race compared to others, but they were feared, respected, and sometimes hated. They came from a death world called Earth, a planet full of storms, predators, and disasters. Everything on their homeworld had tried to kill them, but they had survived. Not only survived, they had thrived, and now they stood among the strongest races in the galaxy. The human commander looked at the Zerath, who were still trembling, and then looked at the council. His voice was calm, but it carried a sharp edge. "You mock them because they are weak," he said, "but weakness is not forever." The council chamber grew quiet. The humans were not smiling, not laughing. They studied the Zerath with serious eyes. One of them, a woman in uniform, stepped forward and said, "If you wish to change your fate, come to us, train with us, live with us, suffer with us, and we will show you what it means to rise." The Zerath elders froze, their hearts pounding. No one had ever spoken to them like this before. Others always looked down on them, but these humans, they were offering something different. Not pity, not charity, but a chance. The Dravak warlord slammed the table, his voice full of anger. "Humans, do not waste your time. The Zerath are hopeless. They will never be warriors." The human commander turned his head slowly. His cold eyes met the warlord's, and in a low voice he replied, "You said the same about us once, and yet here we are." The chamber fell into silence again. The Zerath leaders felt their hearts racing. The humans' words burned inside them, a spark of something they had not felt in centuries' hope. That night, Elder Vera gathered her people. They spoke of fear, of doubt, of the long years of shame. But they also spoke of the humans, of the fire in their voices. Could this be their chance? Could they finally rise from weakness? The debate went on until the sons of their world rose. At last, with shaking hands, Elder Vera sent her message to the humans. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of a whole race. We are ready. Teach us how to be strong. And so, for the first time in history, the weakest species in the galaxy prepared to walk a new path, a path of pain, of struggle, but also of power, a path that would change not only their fate, but the fate of the galaxy itself. First training the journey to Earth was not what the Zerath expected. Their ships were small, weak, and slow. When they arrived in human space, they saw fleets of massive warships, sharp like blades, moving in perfect formation. Each ship carried weapons strong enough to destroy entire moons. The Zerath trembled, wondering if they had made the right choice. When they finally reached Earth, their jaws dropped. The planet itself looked dangerous. Lightning storms flashed across dark clouds. Oceans roared with waves taller than buildings, and mountains stretched high into the sky like jagged teeth. "This world is alive," whispered one Zerath youth, "and it wants to kill everything on it." To the Zerath, Earth felt like a nightmare, but to the humans, it was home. And that was the first lesson. The training began the very next morning. Human soldiers marched the Zerath into the wild forests of Earth. The Zerath stumbled on roots, gasped for breath under the heavy gravity, and shivered in the cold air. Every step was pain. Every moment felt like punishment. "Run!" shouted the human sergeant. The Zerath tried to obey, but their thin legs buckled. Some fell face first into the mud, coughing. Others cried out, clutching their chests as the gravity crushed them. The humans did not stop. They pushed them harder, louder. "If you want to live, move." For the Zerath, it was torture. For the humans, it was only the beginning. By the third day, the Zerath were broken, their skin bruised, their voices hoarse, their bodies shaking. Many whispered, "We cannot do this. We were fools to come." But one small Zerath child, younger than the others, refused to stop. Her name was Kelly. Though her body trembled, though she fell again and again, she kept standing. A human soldier noticed and knelt beside her. "You are weak now," he said softly, "but strength is built from pain. Every time you stand, you grow stronger. Never forget that." Those words spread among the Zerath like fire, and though their bodies were still frail, something inside them began to change. The next phase of training was survival. The humans dropped the Zerath in the wild with no weapons, no food, only their hands. At first, the Zerath panicked. The forests were full of predators with sharp claws and eyes glowing in the dark. Some Zerath tried to hide, but the beasts found them. Some tried to run, but the humans had warned them. Running will not save you. Fight or die. On the fourth night, a Zerath elder faced a predator, a beast twice his size. With teeth like knives, his legs shook, his hands trembled, but he remembered the human words. He picked up a stone, his only weapon. The beast roared and lunged. The elder swung with all his strength. The stone cracked against the beast's skull. To his shock, the monster fell dead. The elder stood frozen, gasping. The other Zerath stared in awe. He was not strong. He was not brave, but he had survived, and that was enough. The humans watched from the shadows, their eyes cold but proud. "They are learning," one soldier whispered. "They are finally learning." Weeks turned into months. The Zerath's soft bodies grew harder, their movements quicker, their eyes sharper. They were still smaller and weaker than humans, but they were no longer the fragile creatures they had once been. They began to run without falling, to lift stones heavier than their own bodies, to fight beasts without fear. For the first time, they felt a taste of strength. But the humans were not finished. The final stage of training was combat. The Zerath were given weapons. At first sticks, then blades, and finally energy rifles. The humans attacked them in waves, testing their courage. The Zerath failed many times. They were knocked down, disarmed, humiliated. But each time they stood again, bloodied but unbroken. Kali, the child who had refused to give up, became a symbol. She was small, even for a Zerath. Yet she fought with a fire that shocked even the humans. Once, during a training drill, she was surrounded by 3 soldiers. Instead of running, she used the ground itself. Rolling, dodging, striking with speed, she was defeated, but when she rose, the human sergeant smiled. "That," he said, "is the heart of a warrior." The Zerath had begun to believe, not in weapons, not in armor, but in themselves still. Doubt lingered. Some whispered, "Even if we are stronger now, the galaxy will still see us as weak." The human commander answered with a single line, "Then prove them wrong." And so, the weakest species in the galaxy continued their training. Every cut, every bruise, every fall was another step away from weakness. Breaking the limits, the Zerath had survived months on Earth. They had run until their legs bled, fought beasts with bare hands, and learned to carry weapons without trembling. But now came the hardest lesson of all. Humans gathered the Zerath at a massive canyon, deep and endless, with sharp winds howling across the cliffs. "This," the human commander said, "is where you stop being survivors and start becoming warriors." The Zerath looked down at the canyon floor, hundreds of meters below. Some gasped. Others stepped back in fear. "Cross it," the commander ordered, pointing to a single rope. Bridge swaying in the wind. The bridge was thin, half broken, and the fall meant certain death. At first, no one moved. The fear was too much. The Zerath had always been taught to avoid danger, to hide, to beg for safety. But one of them, Kelly, the small child who had never given up, stepped forward. Her legs shook, her heart pounded, but she placed her foot on the bridge. The wood creaked, the wind howled, but she did not stop. One step, then another, then another. The humans watched in silence. When Kali finally reached the other side, she raised her arms and shouted, "I am not weak anymore." Her voice echoed across the canyon. The other Zerath felt the fire in her words. One by one, they began to cross. Some fell, clinging to ropes in terror, but humans pulled them up and shouted, "Stand again." By the end of the day, every Zerath had crossed, and for the first time, they felt something they had never known before: pride. From that day, the training grew harsher. Humans forced them to fight against machines that fired real weapons. They ran drills where the Zerath were outnumbered 3-1. They were pushed until their bodies screamed. But something strange happened. Instead of breaking, the Zerath grew sharper, stronger, faster. Their bodies were still small, but their minds changed. They learned to think like hunters, to set traps, to fight dirty, to strike where the enemy was weakest. Humans called it adapt or die. The Zerath began to live those words. One night, during a live drill, a squad of Zerath was cornered by drones. The machines pinned them against a cliff, lasers firing. There was no escape. But instead of surrendering, the Zerath used the terrain. They rolled boulders down on the drones, crushing them. They ambushed the rest in silence, striking from the shadows. When the humans inspected the battlefield, they were stunned. The weaklings had turned the hopeless fight into victory. From then on, whispers spread through the human camps. "These Zerath," some soldiers said, "they're learning faster than anyone expected." Others nodded. "They don't fight with strength. They fight with desperation, and desperation is dangerous." The Zerath began to notice too. They no longer collapsed under Earth's heavy gravity. They no longer froze when facing predators. They no longer shook when holding weapons. Instead, they felt hunger for more. Hunger to prove themselves, but with pride came new fears. One night, Elder Vera spoke to the human commander. What if the galaxy still calls us weak? She asked, her voice heavy with doubt. The commander's eyes were sharp as steel. Then you don't give them a choice, he said. You don't ask them to see you as strong, you force them to see it. The words struck deep, and the very next day, the Zerath faced a trial they would never forget. The humans built an arena, wide and brutal, with fire, traps, and drones armed with live weapons. The entire Zerath colony was ordered to watch. Only the strongest of their kind entered the arena. Among them was Kelly. Though still young, the fight began with chaos. Blades clashed, traps snapped, drones fired. The Zerath fought like shadows rolling, striking, vanishing. One by one, the machines fell. And when the dust cleared, the Zerath stood in the center of the arena, bloodied but alive. The crowd of Zerath watching fell silent. Then they erupted in cheers. They were no longer ashamed of who they were. They had seen with their own eyes that the weak could rise. But the humans were not cheering. They stood in silence, studying, calculating. Finally, the commander spoke to his soldiers, his voice low. They're breaking their limits faster than we thought. If the galaxy sees them now, everything will change. And far above, among the stars, rumors already began to spread. Pirates whispered in fear. Empires scoffed with unease. The weakest species was no longer crawling. They were learning to run, and soon they would learn to fight. First test of war of the day came sooner than anyone expected. Human commanders had planned more years of training, but war does not wait. A distress signal crackled through the human base. An allied colony was under attack. The enemy was a pirate. Fleet, ruthless raiders who hunted the weak across the galaxy. When the Zerath heard the word pirates, fear returned. The pirates had destroyed their homes before, enslaved their people, laughed at their weakness. Now those same pirates had come again, but this time the Zerath were not the same. The human commander gathered them. You have trained, you have bled, you have survived, he said, his voice steady as iron. Now you face the real test, not against drones or beasts, but against the ones who once crushed you. You can run like before, or you can stand and fight. Choose. The Zerath looked at one another. They saw the fear in each other's eyes, but they also saw fire. And Kelly, small and fierce, stepped forward. We fight, she said, her voice clear, and the others echoed her words. We fight. The fleet launched within the hour. Human warships led the way, massive and powerful. But behind them, smaller craft carried the Zerath new recruits. Untested, the humans had given them basic rifles, light armor, and one order: survive. The battle began in the void. Pirate ships swarmed like wolves, their weapons flashing bright across the darkness. Human battleships answered with thunder, blasting entire raiders apart. But the pirates were many, and some broke through, landing on the allied colony below. That was where the Zerath were sent. The first time in history, they went not as slaves, but as soldiers. The colony burned, flames rising into the black sky. Screams echoed through the streets as civilians ran. The Zerath dropped into the chaos, rifles shaking in their hands. For a moment, they froze. The pirates were larger, armored, confident. One pirate laughed when he saw them. The weaklings? They sent you? The laughter ended when the first shot rang out. Kali fired, the blast striking the pirate in the chest. He staggered, shocked, then fell. The other Zerath followed her lead, their fear turning to fury. They moved like they had been taught, fast, low, using shadows, striking where the enemy was blind. The pirates expected weak prey. Instead, they met fighters who did not back down. The Zerath darted between buildings, using smoke and rubble as cover. They set traps with explosives, ambushed patrols, struck with precision. For every Zerath who fell, 2 pirates went with them. A squad of Zerath cornered a group of civilians trapped in a burning hall. The pirates guarding the door mocked them, but the Zerath charged, shouting. With a voice they never knew they had, they fought with desperation, clawing, striking, firing. When it was over, the civilians were free. One child looked up at them with wide eyes and whispered, "They are not weak." The fight dragged on through the night. The humans above rained fire on the pirate fleet, but on the ground, the Zerath carved their first victory. Bloodied, bruised, but unbroken, at dawn, the surviving pirates fled, their ships retreating into the void. Leaving only silence behind, the Zerath stood in the ruins of the colony, their rifles heavy in their hands. They were alive, and more than that, they had won. The human commander arrived, walking through the smoke and ash. He looked at the Zerath, their small bodies covered in dirt and blood, their eyes burning. "You faced death," he said slowly, "and you did not break. From this day, you are no longer the weakest. From this day, you are warriors," the Zerath cheered, their voices echoing across the ruined colony. For the first time in history, they had fought the ones who enslaved them, and they had stood tall. But deep in the galaxy, the news spread. Whispers moved from system to system. The weakest species had killed pirates, had defended a colony, had survived where none thought they could. Some laughed, calling it luck. Others felt unease, and a few began to fear. Because if the Zerath could rise, trained by humans, then no empire was truly safe. Weakest had tasted war, and now they hungered for more. The turning point the galaxy had laughed for centuries. The Zerath were the weakest species, slaves to pirates, prey for stronger empires. But after the battle on the colony world, whispers spread like fire. The weaklings fought back. Some said they killed pirates. Others whispered, and though many still mocked, something had changed. For the first time, the name Zerath carried weight. The humans knew this moment was dangerous. Victory brought pride, but also attention. And attention in the galaxy was a blade, sharp and deadly. The human commander called the Zerath together. "You have proven yourselves," he said, his voice low but steady. "But the galaxy will not. Forgive what you did. You were supposed to remain weak, easy to crush. Now they will test you harder than ever." The words proved true sooner than expected. Weeks later, the skies of another colony burned. But this time, the attackers were not pirates. They were soldiers of the Vorth Dominion and Empire, known for crushing rebellion with fire and steel. The Vorth laughed at the reports of the Zerath. They killed pirates? One general sneered. "Let us remind them of their place." Warships of the Vorth dropped into orbit, black and sharp like blades. Their soldiers marched into the colony streets, tall, armored, their weapons humming with deadly energy. This was no raid. This was a message. Weak species do not rise. The humans prepared to fight, but the commander looked at the Zerath. "This time it is your battle," he said. The Zerath felt fear return like ice in their veins, but they also remembered Kelly's voice, the child who had crossed the canyon. "We fight," she had said then, and again the Zerath answered. "We fight." The battle was nothing like the pirate raid. The Vorth soldiers were disciplined, their armor thick, their weapons brutal. At first, the Zerath fell back, their rifles sparking uselessly against the shields of the enemy. It felt like the old days when they were helpless. The Vorth laughed as they advanced. "This is the strength of the galaxy," they roared. "This is why you will never rise." But the Zerath were not the same prey anymore. They remembered their training. They remembered the traps, the shadows, the hunger. If they could not break armor with bullets, they would break it with fire, with stone, with cleverness. Kelly, now leading her own squad, shouted, "Don't fight them where they are strong. Fight them where they are blind." The Zerath split into small groups. darting through alleys, climbing rooftops, hiding in smoke. They struck at supply lines, tore apart communication wires, turned the streets into a maze of death. One squad of Zerath lured a group of Vorth soldiers into a narrow street. Explosives hidden in the rubble tore the invaders apart. Another squad climbed above the soldiers, dropping burning fuel from rooftops. The Vorth roared in fury, but every time they struck, the Zerath vanished. The weak were becoming hunters. The battle dragged into the night. The humans watched from the shadows, only stepping in when needed. They had promised to train the Zerath, and now the training was alive. The colony streets echoed not with Vorth victory chants, but with Zerath war cries. By dawn, the unthinkable had happened. The Vorth Dominion forces retreated. They left behind burning wreckage and silence. The Zerath stood bloodied, scarred, but unbroken. They had faced not pirates, but an Empire's army, and they had survived. A human commander walked among them. "You broke their pride," he said. An Empire tasted fear today. The Zerath lifted their weapons and shouted into the rising sun. For the first time in their history, they had beaten soldiers of an eye. Empire, it was the turning point. From that day, no one could pretend the Zerath were weak. But far away, in the high halls of the Galactic Council, the news spread like thunder. Council members argued, shouted, and raged. The Zerath are changing, one warned. If humans train them further, they will become unstoppable. Others scoffed. They are still fragile, still few. But fear had entered their voices. The Council sent out orders. Watch them. Test them. Break them if needed. The weakest species had survived 2 wars. Now the galaxy itself was watching. The Zerath had reached the turning point. There was no going back. The weaklings of yesterday were becoming the warriors of tomorrow, and the galaxy trembled at what that meant. Rise of fear, the galaxy was vast, filled with countless species and endless wars, but few stories spread as fast as the rise of the Zerath. Once the weakest, now the name carried whispers in markets, in military halls, in the council chambers. They beat the pirates, people said. They even forced the Vorth Dominion to retreat. Others whispered. At first, the words were spoken with disbelief. Then with unease, and finally with fear, the Vorth Dominion burned with shame. An empire known for crushing rebellion had been outwitted by small creatures barely half their size. Their generals demanded revenge. "We will send a full legion." "Next time," they growled. But even as they spoke, other empires listened. If the Zerath could resist the Vorth, what would happen if they kept growing? The Galactic Council met in secret chambers. Great lords and rulers sat in a circle of light, their voices heavy with anger. "This is humanity's doing," one said, slamming his clawed hand against the table. "They are turning the weakest into killers," another hissed. "If they continue, the Zerath will become a weapon no empire can face." There was silence, then a decision. The Zerath must be broken before they rise any further. But while the council plotted, on Earth, the Zerath trained harder than ever. They no longer begged for survival. They demanded strength. Kelly, once a trembling child, now led squads with sharp eyes and steady hands. She spoke to her people not as a frightened survivor, but as a leader. "We are not weak anymore," she told them. "We are proof that the galaxy was wrong." Still, deep inside, doubts remained. Some elders whispered, "We have angered powers too great. The council will not allow us to live." But the younger Zerath only clenched their fists. "Let them come," they said. "We will show them." The chance to prove those words came soon. A shadow fleet entered Zerath space, fast and silent. It was not pirates, not Vorth soldiers. It was a combined strike force. The council had sent assassins, hunters, killers from several empires. Their goal was simple: erase the Zerath before they could rise further. The attack came at night. Silent ships dropped onto a training camp. Blades gleamed in the dark. Rifles flashed. The Zerath awoke to chaos. At first, it seemed hopeless professional. Killers against trainees. But the Zerath had lived too long in shadows. They knew fear, and they had learned to fight through it. Kelly shouted, her voice cutting through the night. Do not scatterhunt them. The Zerath split into packs, moving like smoke. The assassins expected easy kills. Instead, they found themselves caught in traps, ambushed in alleys, surrounded by fire. Every strike the assassins made was met with 2 in return. One assassin cornered Kelly, towering over her with a blade raised high, but she did not run. She grabbed a broken pipe, blocked the strike, and fired her rifle point blank. The assassin fell. The camp filled with screams, gunfire, and finally silence. When dawn broke, the ground was littered with the bodies of the council's best killers. The Zerath had lost many, but they had not been erased. They stood among the smoke, blood on their hands, their eyes burning with something new, not just pride vengeance. The human commander arrived, walking slowly through the battlefield. He looked at the small warriors. Their rifles still hot, their armor scarred. They sent assassins because they fear you, he said, and fear is the greatest weapon you now hold. Those words carried weight. Across the galaxy, reports spread of the failed strike. Whispers turned into shouts. If assassins cannot kill them, what will stop them? Markets buzzed with rumors. Soldiers muttered in unease, and rulers clenched their fists in secret fear. The Zerath had not just survived. They had made the galaxy afraid, and fear was power. That night, the Zerath gathered in a great hall. Kelly stood before them, her voice steady, though her hands trembled with exhaustion. They call us weak, she said, but today the galaxy trembled. If they fear us, then we are no longer slaves. If they fear us, then we are free. The hall erupted. In cheers, voices that once begged now roared. The Zerath, once the weakest, had become a rising storm, and storms, once they begin, do not stop. But high above, in hidden chambers, the council raged. If fear had begun, then war was next. The galaxy would not sit idle. They would strike harder, stronger, with everything they had. The question was no longer if the Zerath would. A turning point the galaxy had laughed for centuries. The Zerath were the weakest species, slaves to pirates, prey for stronger empires. But after the battle on the colony world, whispers spread like fire. The weaklings fought back. Some said they killed pirates. Others whispered, and though many still mocked, something had changed. For the first time, the name Zerath carried weight. The humans knew this moment was dangerous. Victory brought pride, but also attention, and attention in the galaxy was a blade, sharp and deadly. The human commander called the Zerath together. You have proven yourselves, he said, his voice low but steady, but the galaxy will not. Forgive what you did. You were supposed to remain weak, easy to crush. Now they will test you harder than ever. The words proved true sooner than expected. Weeks later, the skies of another colony burned. But this time, the attackers were not pirates. They were soldiers of the Vorth Dominion, an empire known for crushing rebellion with fire and steel. The Vorth laughed at the reports of the Zerath. They killed pirates? One general sneered. Let us remind them of their place. Warships of the Vorth dropped into orbit, black and sharp like blades. Their soldiers marched into the colony streets, tall, armored, their weapons humming with deadly energy. This was no raid. This was a message. Weak species do not rise. The humans prepared to fight, but the commander looked at the Zerath. This time, it is your battle, he said. The Zerath felt fear return like ice in their veins, but they also remembered Kelly's voice, the child who had crossed the canyon. We fight, she had said then, and again the Zerath answered. We fight. The battle was nothing like the pirate raid. The Vorth soldiers were disciplined, their armor thick, their weapons brutal. At first, the Zerath fell back, their rifles sparking uselessly against the shields of the enemy. It felt like the old days when they were helpless. The Vorth laughed as they advanced. "This is the strength of the galaxy," they roared. "This is why you will never rise." But the Zerath were not the same prey anymore. They remembered their training. They remembered the traps, the shadows, the hunger. If they could not break armor with bullets, they would break it with fire. With stone, with cleverness, Kali, now leading her own squad, shouted, "Don't fight them where they are strong. Fight them where they are blind." The Zerath split into small groups, darting through alleys, climbing rooftops, hiding in smoke. They struck at supply lines, tore apart communication wires, turned the streets into a maze of death. One squad of Zerath lured a group of Vorth soldiers into a narrow street. Explosives hidden in the rubble tore the invaders apart. Another squad climbed above the soldiers, dropping burning fuel from rooftops. The Vorth roared in fury, but every time they struck, the Zerath vanished. The weak were becoming hunters. The battle dragged into the night. The humans watched from the shadows, only stepping in when needed. They had promised to train the Zerath, and now the training was alive. The colony streets echoed not with Vorth victory chants, but with Zerath war cries. By dawn, the unthinkable had happened. The Vorth Dominion forces retreated. They left behind burning wreckage and silence. The Zerath stood bloodied, scarred, but unbroken. They had faced not pirates, but an Empire's army, and they had survived. The human commander walked among them. "You broke their pride," he said. "An Empire tasted fear today." The Zerath lifted their weapons and shouted into the rising sun. For the first time in their history, they had beaten soldiers of an Empire. It was the turning point. From that day, no one could pretend the Zerath were weak. But far away, in the high halls of the Galactic Council, the news spread like thunder. Council members argued, shouted, and raged. "The Zerath are changing," one warned. "If humans train them further, they will become unstoppable." Others scoffed. "They are still fragile, still few." But fear had entered their voices. The council sent out orders.